Hi, I'm Alex Loney. I'm a associate professor of classical languages at Wheaton College.
Dr. Alexander Loney. Alex, good to see you. Welcome to Exegetically Speaking.
It's good to be here.
You know, this is actually welcome back because you've been with us before
Yes.
in previous years, and we'll probably try to link to that on our show notes coming up. We're here today to talk about the sound of Greek and the way it might have sounded, the way it could have sounded centuries and centuries ago. I mean, Greek as a living language is still with us today. Modern Greeks speak it a particular way. We can study that and get to know that. But it's actually got a history that goes way back, how many years, you think?
Well,
28
thousands of years.
Thousands of years,
Thousands
yeah,
of
2,800 at least,
At
right?
least, yes.
Something like that.
Yes, I mean, actually, our earliest Greek documents go all the way back to the second millennium BC.
And that's called Linear B?
Linear
right?
B, yes,
Linear
right.
B,
Yeah.
okay. And Greek was written at that time the same way Hebrew was, wasn't it? I mean, didn't it go from right to left?
I think that you had it going in you could actually have some documents going left to right, right to left. It was written in a kind of script that was more similar to Hebrew. It was syllabic rather than alphabetic, right? So the Greek that we're familiar with nowadays is written in an alphabet. In fact, it's the same alphabet with changes over time that we use today in English.
So let's talk about some of the phases, periods or so, that Greek has gone through, starting, let's say, with the classical period.
Yes, well, right, so the classical period refers to that time frame from the 5th, 4th centuries BC in which the great writers like Plato, Aristotle, Sophocles composed their great works in and around Athens, and it set a benchmark for literature and for the language. And then a version of that dialect of Greek was exported across the Eastern Mediterranean and very widely by the conquest of Alexander the Great.
This is 4th century.
This is, the end of towards the end of the 4th century. And then we enter a phase of history where the successors of Alexander now kind of ruled that world with this Greek-speaking aristocracy and installed various kings around, and that's the Hellenistic period, and that goes all the way from the death of Alexander, conventionally 323, to the Roman conquest of Egypt around 31 or so BC. And that really spread Greek widely, and then we get this version of that Greek, of mostly Attic Greek, somewhat simplified, we call the Common Greek, the Koiné, which means common in Greek. That was the real kind of administrative, for many people, their second language in that world.
But they needed that language in order to sort of get along in business and in commerce and government and those kinds of things.
Of course, yes, right. Yeah. And then that's, of course, the Greek that the scriptures were written in, and it enabled those scriptures to be widely spread and read across that wider Eastern Mediterranean world.
And that lasted up until the Byzantine period, and Greek. I mean, languages change over time, the way they're pronounced,
Right.
and different places you might have different pronunciation, as we know from the South and the Midwest, for example.
Yes, that's right. There's all kinds of little local variation in dialect, and then things change over time, just as you said, right? And that can be particularly noticeable in certain letter forms and the way that they change their pronunciation over time. Yeah.
So there are varieties of ways that I have heard the Greek of the Koiné period pronounced.
Right.
Give us some examples and maybe some reasons why we have these different schemes of pronunciation.
Yeah, and, I'm going to say also just give credit to this new book that came out by Benjamin Kantor. He's a scholar at Cambridge who's spent a whole bunch of time recently analyzing the various inscriptions and evidence that we have for how people on the ground in the 1st century AD in and around Israel were speaking Greek, and he does this by looking for like spelling mistakes that people would make as they were transcribing words or transcribing words from Greek into their Hebrew writing system and vice versa. And so we get some information from that on the ground for like how people were actually speaking it. One of the things it reveals is that the Greek of that period, it's in a transitional phase. And this shouldn't surprise us. Languages are always changing. The way that most people nowadays learn Greek, to pronounce Greek, is kind of like a invention of the roughly sort of 18th, 17th century methods of learning Greek in that humanist phase.
So it doesn't go back to Erasmus. I've often heard it referred to as the Erasmian system of pronunciation.
Yeah. I mean, it does go back to Erasmus, although apparently, as I was reading in this wonderful book by Mr. Kantor, that Erasmus actually himself pronounced the Greek more like modern Greek of his day.
Oh, it did? Okay.
Yeah, not the reconstructed version that we now call Erasmian Greek. But that's not that important, I suppose. What's interesting is that, so there's a kind of conventional classroom method that we all use, and it probably is not exactly what was really spoken at any point in history.
So if we were to read, if we were to say John 1:1 to the writer of that fourth gospel, he would say, "What?
Yeah,
I didn't get that." Right?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Yeah. So give us an example. I mean, we were looking at John 1:1 earlier, and I've heard all sorts of different ways that certain things are pronounced.
Well, we were just talking before we started here about just the word and the two words in John 1:1 of the word. So in Attic Greek, that would be ho logos. And one change that happened by the time you get to the Koiné and biblical period was that the H drops off of that first, and so it's probably just O, which would be this article that means the. And then you also, that gamma, the G sound in the middle of logos, probably turned into a sound that I can't really produce, but Spanish speakers can do in amigo, logos. And eventually, as that sound continues to change, it will turn into more of a Y sound, which you find in modern Greek. So, what's your favorite Greek street food? It's probably euros, because you'll be spelled with a gamma. Yeah, so it's more of like a Y sound now.
Right. And these are just some of the many changes that take place.
Oh yeah.
Over the years. In reading Greek. I've heard logos, I've heard logos, I've heard all sorts of different ways, but I haven't heard that softer gamma there, which like you said, is a little bit more maybe easier for our Spanish brothers and sisters to pronounce.
Yes.
Dr. Alex Loney, thanks for being with us today on Exegetically Speaking.
Oh, you're welcome. It's great to be here.
Thanks again to Alex Loney for being with us on the podcast today. There are a lot of different conventions, ways of pronouncing Greek words that are being taught in schools all across the world. And it's kind of interesting to try to get back close to what we think Paul and Jesus and others who spoke the language might have been saying, the way the language sounded, right? So anyway, thanks to Alex Loney. If you want to be in touch, send us an email at exegetically.speaking@wheaton.edu. If you have a guest you'd like us to talk with, if you have a topic you'd like us to cover, a particular passage that's given you trouble, do that. Send it to us. And also, if you want to study biblical languages, there's no better place than at Wheaton College. Just go to Wheaton College and look for modern and classical languages. Get started today. Listen, great to be with you. David Capes, your host from the Lanier Theological Library. We love what Wheaton is doing and what it's about. Subscribe to this podcast and be sure to tell a friend. Thanks for listening.